Hi all, welcome to round 5 of the FIDE World Championship match 2024. So Gukesh with the white pieces against Ding Liren. We have e4, e6, the French defence, d4, d5, and now the exchange French is played. So this can sometimes be a good drawing tool if player with white, especially if you're playing a stronger opponent, it could be a very good drawing tool sometimes, or if you just want to draw. But does Gukesh really want just to draw with the white pieces here? It is a bit surprising. If we look at French defence specialists, Botvinnik, for example, only had 2 games where players have played an exchange French against him. He drew one and he won one of those. He had 54 games with knight c3. He had 25 games with knight d2, the Drawish variation, and he had 5 with e5. Korchnoi, actually, people were trying to draw with Korchnoi, it seems, lower rated players, and actually Korchnoi had e takes d5 in 17 games, but you know what, he had a 35.3% win rate with black, 52.9% draw rate. Okay, they did achieve their draws, but he only lost in 11.8%. So it's not, it's usually a weapon of choice to draw. This is the funny thing about this. Ding Liren has had it twice in two games. So Ding Liren's experience in the French defence is, he's actually had more games. He's had 21 games with knight c3, as you might think, and knight d2 as well, 13 with knight d2, Drawish, and then 2 with e5. Now, in the 2 games that Ding Liren's had before, they're actually quite exciting games. He does actually try and go for a win. They're quite, some of them, they do have, well, some of them, 2 of them, they're both quite exciting to check out, actually. But anyway, in this game, okay, we have e takes d5. It's not advisable to play queen takes d5. But having said that, on faster time controls, I do remember I was annoyed by the exchange French, and I actually did play queen takes d5. And even though white should be better, at least the pawn structure is imbalanced. So, you could play on from this position, for example, and I won from this position. It's a potential irritation to exchange French players at faster time limits to actually consider the inferior move, queen takes d5. It just makes sure that the pawn structure is not symmetrical. So with e takes d5, when we have a symmetrical pawn structure like this, it's just generally a little bit more dull and less opportunity for both sides. But both sides are sharing this e-file. So if you do want a surprise weapon against the French defence, exchange variation in faster time controls, it is interesting to consider queen takes d5, or just anything like knight f6, just make it into a gambit. Just anything really. Okay, apart from e takes d5, if you don't care about the result of the game on faster time controls, you can make it interesting. Okay, so anyway, knight f6, knight f3, knight f6. If knight c6, if black tries to make something interesting here with knight c6, and black could even try an opposite castling queenside game, actually it's not technically advisable nowadays, I would say, especially with engine preparation. Castling is the safe bet here. If you castle queenside with black in this position, it seems engines really actually prefer white here. Even if we leave the rook on e1, this position, this type of position here, white's getting a dangerous set of possibilities. Knight d to f3, and then a4. White's getting a dangerous position. Yeah, this is quite a dangerous way of playing it. If white knows exactly what they're doing, it should be better for white after b4. It should be better for white. But yeah, it needs detailed preparation. But yeah, the safe bet for black is just to castle here, and it should be even. So anyway, knight f6 is played. There's also yeah, okay, let's just go on with that. Bishop d3, and now c5 is an attempt to make things interesting, actually. If bishop d6 and both sides castle, bishop g5, bishop g4, knight bd2, black does best not keep playing to symmetrical moves, but rather play h6 here. This would be a safe move, and then c5 is actually just even here. And yeah, I do have like a multi-hour video content with Paul Georgiou on the Kingscrusher channel. If you look up Exchange French Kingscrusher, you'll see, I can put it in the description as well. If you want to know about the Exchange French even more, then there is a video on that, the Exchange French from the black perspective, with some interesting key Korchnoi games. Korchnoi actually had quite a quick win as well when someone played the Exchange French against him. He's had some interesting games. So here in this variation, coming back to this variation, if knight bd7, white could play c4 to try for advantage, bishop takes, and then c5. And actually this kind of plan is what happened in this game in reverse, where white's got this extra bit of space and white could claim a small edge. So anyway, but as mentioned, black doesn't have to play h6. Black doesn't have to rather play knight bd7 to allow c4. So there is this kind of idea c5 could be useful in certain circumstances. So anyway, c5 was played. I would say it's more interesting than bishop d6. We have c3. So again, yeah, there's an interesting move at some point, c4, which could come in handy. If d takes c5, bishop takes, both sides could castle, knight c3, h6 to prevent bishop g5, h3. It's just an even position, actually, overall. Okay, there is this isolated queen pawn. Yeah, this swings and roundabouts. So c3 was played, and now this c4 is played, gaining a bit of space. And what it actually means statistically now, white's pawns on dark squares, black's pawns on light squares. It means actually strategically, if we exchange off the dark square bishops as white, sometimes we get outpost squares like e5 and c5 to make use of. If black exchanges off strategically the light square bishops, in fact black would have e4 to play with as an outpost square. Just bear that in mind. Strategic bishop exchanges to bear in mind. We have bishop d6, queen e2 check. Now if white had just castled and black castles h3, this position h6, there shouldn't be too much to worry about. g5 is actually possible here. If white tries a sack, it's not particularly sound. King g7, black's getting a small edge. Bishop g3, this doesn't matter about the double pawns, actually, it's about even. So even though there are imbalances, it still tends to be about even. Remarkably, actually, it does seem to be in balance. If, this situation with bishop g5, it does seem to be in balance. So anyway, queen e2 check. We have queen e7, which is the safe move. Bishop e6 would be a kind of relative mistake because of knight g5. White getting the bishop pair is going to be a small edge for white. This is going to be a small edge. In the case of f takes e6, this is actually quite a bad scenario for black because of the move f4, and white's getting attacking prospects here. We play f4 on f takes e6, and in this situation here we get this outpost square e5, and that bishop's looking really good. So this is a kind of exciting position. We can take with the d pawn to avoid exchange of rooks on the f file coming up, and actually lift the rook, and we're getting an exciting attacking position. So yes, black doesn't want any of that. Queen e7, it's okay to draw with black. Queens come off. White castles, rook e8, rook e1 check. If b3, you may think, well, hold on, with the knight on b1, bishop a3, this is a plan I've seen before in a Karpov-Polgar game, where Karpov did actually get good dark square grip later, but there were some opportunities for Polgar, Judith Polgar. This in this position here, this b3 undermine, yeah, actually b5 is possible. a4, c takes b3. I mean, this is possible with an even position. And also c takes, it isn't a major thing here, it seems. Bishop a3, the strategic bishop exchange that I mentioned before, it isn't that big a problem, actually. It's not that exploitable. Even if we do have an e5 outpost, pressure on the c file here. Let's imagine rook takes c3, knight b5, and some tactic sequences like this. It just ends up as an even position. It's not really that exploitable. So, okay, rook e1 check is played. Rook takes e8 check. King takes e8. And now we have bishop g5, knight bd7, knight bd2, h6, bishop h4, and now knight h5. So, white is basically prompted, encouraged to try that strategic bishop exchange. As I mentioned, to exchange off the bishops like this might mean the amplification of outpost squares like c5 and e5 later. But after this bishop h4, in fact, bishop g3 is not really encouraged. Knight h5 is played. If king f8, does it even matter though if bishop g3? Again, it's a case where white's got these double pawns. The knight could sit on g4, knight g4. It's not such a big deal. So knight h5 anyway. We have rook e1 check. If bishop g3, black can take and then b5 and then a5. This is just going to be an even position as well. Although it seems as though black's trying to do something interesting. Maybe in a practical sense it does look as though black's got the strategic pawn break and some pressure though, even if it's theoretically even with best play. So okay, rook e1 check, king f8, and now something exciting happens here. Yeah, wake up, something exciting happens here. It's g4. This is a very exciting moment of the game, g4. So if knight f1, black could play knight d to f6 to open up the bishop and the knight stopping g4. Even though it looks a little bit awkward, the knights are actually protecting each other. It's not that easy to exploit this situation. If knight e5, g5 is even possible, and knight takes g3, h takes a5 is even. So g4. So what's happened here? Pawn moves, committal pawn moves. This is becoming a feature of the match, these interesting committal pawn moves. Okay, so knight f4, pawns don't go backwards. So yeah, this is an interesting move. So knight f4 is played. If g5, white can play bishop takes g5 here, and then g takes. And this is actually going to be, for example, here, a small edge for white. This situation, knight e5, this is just the tactical sequence, knight d7 checked to deflect the knight away from the bishop. This is just the example tactical sequence. White gets a small edge. So g5 is not a good idea. Sure, if bishop g3, then black takes, and then black gets a big advantage because of the g4 pawn. So yeah, bishop takes g5 in this circumstance with the knight on h5, leaves black with the more vulnerable pawns. This is promising for white. So anyway, knight f4 is played, bishop g3, which seems to go in an awkward pin. It's like an awkward pin. But knight b6, is the pin that exploitable? We have g5. If knight e5, bishop takes e5 is possible, even though it seems to give white the bishop pair. Knight d3, and here b2 is hit, the rook is hit. If bishop takes d3, c takes, rook e3. Bishop takes g4, black's got a small edge. Say white takes time out to protect that pawn. Then knight c4 hits the rook, hits b2 and d2. If we take here, king f2, it just ends up being even. Even if c4 is lost here, yeah, black doesn't have to play c takes. Black just plays bishop b7. This is a funny little tactic to bear in mind, because now bishop a6, king e3, bishop takes c4. Yeah, some finesse here in this variation. So knight c4 does actually do quite well, it seems. does quite well. So it's hitting d2 and the rook. You know, we can't take as the knight takes. So, okay. So, rook e3 is played. Sorry, in this variation, if rook e3, bishop takes e4. So the whole thing is not worth it. It's just not worth it to play knight e5 here, basically. So g5 is played, which safeguards the pawn away from the attack. H takes, knight takes g5, bishop d7, knight g to f3, rook e8, and now here knight e5, bishop takes e5. Some of the same themes here with knight d3 exist. If f6 had been played, then white gets a big advantage with bishop takes f4. This is just a mistake. This would be a mistake to play f6. There's not much choice here. Bishop takes e5. Yeah, so it is hitting the knight, and black doesn't want to play black doesn't want to play knight d3 here. There's knight takes d7 check, and then bishop takes d6 check. Yeah, disaster, and everything gets dropped, gets hacked off. Yeah, it's just winning material. That's a total disaster. Okay, but so bishop takes e5. We have d takes, which seems to be a relative mistake. Rook takes e5 keeps the balance. Black has bishop a4 here, and the thing is, if bishop takes a4, knight e2 check would be the key point, and then taking on g3 check, then taking on a4, and this ends up, even if white loses b2 there, white's got enough for a draw here. So here h4, we don't want to lose c3, so h4, this position's just drawish. The blockade is enough. So rook takes e5 does lead to a drawish situation after bishop a4. If bishop b1 g5 is possible, it doesn't really matter about the double pawns here. They're not that exploitable. Exploitability is key. So the reason why it's not that exploitable, well, I can just say, let's look at b3 actually, and then bishop d7. It's just going to be even. It's just not enough to work with this position. After king g2, black has resources like bishop g4 if needed. There are resources in this position. Okay, so d takes e5 is played, and now knight d3 is actually rather strong. We have bishop takes d3. If rook e2, knight takes b2, knight f3, bishop g4, this position, black's actually going to end up getting a big advantage here. This situation, c3 is a bit of a target, so that's not possible. Rook e2, white can't afford b2 to be dropped off here. So bishop takes d3, c takes, and you'll note here we've got opposite coloured bishops coming up. Knight c4, so a more raw kind of opposite kind of bishop endgame. Rook e4, it looks as though, hold on, well, isn't this a dangerous pawn? Yeah, not so much with opposite coloured bishops, and the rook's going to the d4 square. So here, Ding Liren played what seems to be a lucrative move, skewering the rook and the pawn. And yeah, it does seem as though bishop f5 might actually be technically stronger. No guarantee of a win, except if white plays rook takes c4. Can you see what black plays here and wins for 200 points? Yeah, black actually plays rook d8, so that the rook d4 move is not working. We just turn it off, and d2. I mean, black just queens. So yes, rook takes c4 is out of the question here. And on rook d4, black's getting actually a theoretical edge at least. It's not necessarily winning position, it's just a theoretical edge. Black has a theoretical small edge, but it's opposite coloured bishops. It's like fortress draws are the most likely result in these kind of positions. But yeah, it does seem from a technical perspective, bishop f5 is more accurate. But an amazing calculator like Gukesh is not going to play rook takes c4 here. So yeah, rook d4. And as I say, a theoretical edge maybe for black. Okay, so bishop c6 though seems okay. It like tries to win a pawn. Rook d4 again for the same reason. Rook takes c4 would be a disaster because of rook d8. And if bishop f4, you know, that's winning a bishop. That would be a total disaster again. You know, rook d4 just taking, and the king's too far away. That's winning. So rook d4. Rooks belong behind pass pawns, either your own pass pawns or the opponent's. That's called the Drawish rule. You might want to check out on Wiki the Drawish rule. Rooks belong behind pass pawns. We have bishop takes f3, so even at the loss of a pawn, it doesn't really matter with opposite coloured bishops. As long as, yeah, rook takes c4 isn't played here, d2 would be winning. So king f2, bishop c6. If bishop h5 again, rook takes c4, d2 is winning. So if king e3 here, b5, b3, this is just a small edge for black. It's just theoretical edge. Theoretical edge, basically it's very, very drawish. So bishop c6 played. Now the king's around for this pass pawn, so rook takes is safe enough. So if d2, king e2, bishop f3, we don't have to take the bishop, we just eliminate the pawn, if in case you're wondering. So rook d8, rook d4, rook takes d4, c takes, bishop d5, and black doesn't even mind going a pawn down here. It's a fortress draw. This position is just a fortress draw without the rooks. King c3, a6, king d3. If king b4, we can reduce the excitement further here by playing b6 to stop the king going further. And here we can stop bishop d8 with king d7. So it's just an even position. So king d3, king f5, king e3, king e6, king d3, king f5, king e3, king e6, and a draw was agreed. A bit of a surprise in the opening to play the exchange French. As I say, you know, the great French defence exponents like Korchnoi and Botvinnik hardly ever had the exchange French played against them. If you really want to play the French defence, there's a lot more examples actually with Korchnoi because there is a lot more games in the database for Korchnoi with the French defence. And as I say, if you look at the description, I'll put that linked video where I've done dual commentary with my good friend Paul Georgiou on the exchange French, handling it from the black perspective, which is worth revising from time to time. It can be an annoying weapon, especially at faster time controls, or if the weaker player is trying to draw with a stronger player, it's a great tool of choice there. But here, yeah, I thought it was a bit strange myself, e takes d5. It's like, you know, there's an advantage with white pieces, but maybe because of bad memories of, you know, the earlier round of the tournament where the French was a great disaster for white. Yeah, Gukesh decided to play the exchange French. Funny decisions. Anyway, so okay, I hope you got some good points out of this video, and do check out my my Kingscrusher playlist for the match, Kingscrusher TV WC in capitals 2024, and also please check out my courses page at justkingscrusher.tv. Some great courses at great discounts there. Okay, thanks very much. Comments, questions, likes, shares, always appreciated. Even any comment, just hi, you got to this point of the video, how exciting you thought the game was, etc. Thanks very much.